Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recommending and looking at some of my favourite British authors. Now, what is quite apparent, I am British, so I am wanting to read and support some authors that are from my own nationality, and I was looking at my shelves and I realised how many of the books and authors that I read from are American. And I was like, there is a lot of American authors here. Not to say that being British is not a privilege, because it is a very privileged culture to come from, and there is plenty of opportunities for writers here also, I believe. I have not tried to write anything, but there are plenty of British authors and author spaces here in Britain. But looking at my shelves, it just made me realise how many there were from America. I mean, there were plenty of other ones from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, but considering the amount of history that we have here and the amount of very famous authors from here from the past, it made me realise how many modern authors. There probably are loads of modern authors, but my list was not as long as I thought it was going to be when I first started writing it. And on top of that, how many non-British authors write about British history or British culture, British things within their books. Which I always feel a little bit tentative about, because I question how much they've researched. Some of them I expect very, very heavily research. They try and make sure that it is authentic to the British experience, but it just feels like there's a very weird line between which cultures you can appropriate and which ones you can't. That, you know, Britain, plenty of people will mimic a British accent. Plenty of people will put British culture into their books, whether that's real life or fantasy. The same with France. That the amount of books that appropriate French culture and put French and hodgepodge French language and culture into their fantasy work is extreme. And if they did that to any other culture, plenty of other cultures, it would not be viewed in the best of lights. So it just makes me wonder, like, why is it okay for some and not for others? And I get a lot of it's probably not malicious in intent. And I get that we are quite privileged where we come from. But today I just thought I would highlight some of my favourite British authors and some of the great books that they have written. And some of these you might not realise were British, because a lot of the time we go into books and we just read the book for the book and for the plot. We don't necessarily read it for the author, so you don't know where they come from until you actually look up the author and look up their history. I thought we'd start and we'll look back on some of the classic British authors and where we have come from, and then I'll move into some of the modern ones, because there are a lot. There are so many classic British authors. Researching a bit, I was like, oh yes, there is so much history here. Going back to like Shakespeare, and then, you know, moving slightly more modern from Shakespeare, you've got works from Jane Austen, you've got Charles Dickens, you've got the Bronte sisters, all three of them. You have George Orwell, you have C.S. Lewis, you have Lewis Carroll. There are a lot of them. And then even getting slightly more modern, there's authors such as J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, this is a classic of fantasy that is still really popular today. I mean, a lot of these authors are still popular today, but Tolkien. And then moving more modern, there's authors like Terry Pratchett, who I have not read from, but very famous British writer. Philip Pullman, who I read growing up as a child. J.K. Rowling, who we don't really talk about so much anymore, but another British writer whose works have been very important for the YA fantasy genre. There's a lot of history here. There is a lot of history with the British writers, which then made me surprised when I was like looking through my shelves and going, American, not British. Oh, British. I will flag some of my favourites, because some of my favourite authors do in fact share the same nationality as me. One of those being John Gwynn. John Gwynn is one of my favourite authors. I've read everything that he has published to date, and will obviously be reading everything this man publishes going forward. I do have a guide to John Gwynn. It's a few years old now, so it doesn't have all of his latest releases on there. I adore John Gwynn's books. He also has two sons that have their own channel, the brothers Gwynn, so I can link their channel down below. But he has three main series: The Faith and the Fallen, which is this one, with the first book being Malice. Then he has the Of Blood and Bone trilogy, which is a continuation of The Faithful and the Fallen, and then he has The Shadow of the Gods and the Bloodsworn Saga, which is a trilogy. This one is my favourite. Absolutely adore it. It's a epic fantasy series with good versus evil, multi-perspectives. There's giants and some magic, not loads of magic actually, and these forces that are moving against each other. Who is the bright star, who's going to be the force from good, and who is the black sun, the force from bad, and these gods that have these pawns upon the earth. So excellent battle scenes, excellent battle scenes. Like if you, even if you don't necessarily like battle scenes, John Gwynn does them well. He does really good battle scenes. So John Gwynn. And also I've only read one series from, but I do have another one, is Jen Williams, who has written The Ninth Reign. She has also written Talon Sister, which is the book that I have not read yet, which is a duology. She also has another trilogy, and I think she's got a book coming out later on this year. So The Ninth Reign is a genre-bending fantasy story, which has elements of horror and sort of sci-fi and definitely fantasy mixed in, and we're set in this world which goes through these reigns, and there hasn't been one for quite a while. And a reign is like when these alien-like beings just sort of take over, and there are these vampires that are in this world that feed off of this tree, but the tree has been dying, so they've been feeding off blood, and that's been killing them slowly. We're following a main character called Lady Vincenza, who is going around investigating things that are going on and retrieving artifacts from the previous reigns, but a reign is potentially going to be coming again. And there's also witches and things in this, so I would recommend this series. Another author I've read everything she has published is Zara El Arifi, who wrote The Final Strive. She's also been writing the Feybound series. I definitely prefer this one if you're going to start reading her works. This is a trilogy, it's all complete, and it is multi-perspective, and it's set in this world where your blood type determines your hierarchy or within society, that you have the red bloods, which are at the top and they can use magic. Then you have the blue bloods, which are beneath them. They are looked down upon and sort of mostly the servants. And then you have the clear bloods, which are at the bottom of society, and when they are born they have their hands cut off and their tongues cut out because they rebelled 100 years ago, and since then they have these very harsh measures against them to stop them from rebelling ever again. And at the beginning of the book we know that these red bloods and blue-blooded babies have been swapped at birth, so that these red-blooded children can be raised with the harshness of society, and then can go into this trial called the Akbar, which decides the politicians and the higher ups within the world with that knowledge, and change the society from within. Loved this, would recommend this whole series, this whole trilogy. A very prolific author who I have only read a couple of books from is Adrien Tchaikovski. So Adrien Tchaikovski has written a lot of books, and a lot of books I have not read. So I have only read Elder Race and Children of Time. That's the other one I've read. I was like, what is it called? But I do own Empire of Black and Gold, which is the start of one of his series, which I think focuses around like bugs. I think there's bugs in it. But this one I really thoroughly enjoyed. It's a novella of his, which is told in two perspectives. One of them sort of leads us down more of a fantasy route, and one of them more of a sci-fi route, that it's set on this planet, and you have the people that have evolved, and they see this magician that lives up on the hill, this fantasy character, and when events start going wrong for them, I think there's like a disease or something that's threatening them, they go, oh well, the magician will be able to save us, the wizard. And in their eyes everything is magical and fantasy-esque, whereas from the magician's point of view, he is a scientist or explorer, astronaut that has been stuck on this planet for many years, and his technology is what is seen as magical. So one viewpoint is fantasy, one viewpoint is sci-fi, as they go and battle this threat. Really thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I definitely need to get to more of his works, because he has so many fantasy books, so many sci-fi books, and you just blink and there's another Adrien Tchaikovsky book that's been published. Another author that I need to get back to and read some more from is Tasha Suri, who has written The Jasmine Throne. She has also written the books of Amber, the first book being Empire of Sand. I need to finish off this series. It is complete. I did plan to do it last year in 2024. It didn't happen. We're now coming up to not quite midway through, but we're now like a good chunk of the way into 2025, and I have not got back to this or continued on with the rest of the series. I do need to do that, but this is a Indian inspired fantasy story. We're following Princess Malini, who's been locked up in this tower by her brother, who is not the nicest. I hope that's not the nicest, but on the back it says despotic brother, and her maidservant Priya, who is forced to like go in there and look after her. There is this very wild magic within this world which slowly can turn people into trees, or that they have these trees growing out of them, which is really interesting. And together these two characters might set the empire ablaze. I do need to go back to this. I think reread this one and then continue on with the series. And then an author that has very recently had a book come out is Jo Abocrombi. I have not actually read Best Served Cold, but I have read the First Law trilogy, or the first books in this world. So Jo Abocrombi is very famous within the grimdark sphere. That is where most of his novels centre, that these worlds, which are not always the brightest, and people go through rather traumatic events. So in the First Law, it follows a cast of characters. I do actually have like my first impressions of First Law as a little like skitty video, because we've got Glocta, who is a torturer. Then there is Logan Ninefingers, who is like this warrior figure, and Giselle, who is like this princely type figure, who has had quite a cushy lifestyle. And it is all of them in this world, and the forces that are at play. And then Best Served Cold is the first of the standalones, which I do need to get to ASAP because it's been too long. But he's got a recent release that's just come out called The Devils, so continuing to write, and I am behind, but I will get there, I will. And then my final British author to highlight today is Samantha Shannon, who has written the Bone Season series, as well as the Priory of the Orange Tree series as well, that world. So neither of which is complete. So the Priory of the Orange Tree is a collection of standalones, so there's two that are out. I think there's a novella coming out in that later on this year. And then the Bone Season is going to be a 7-book series, and the first 5 books in that are out. I have read the first 3, and I have books 4 and 5 to go to get myself back up to date. The Priory of the Orange Tree is much more of like an epic fantasy story with dragons in it. They're quite sprawling, whereas the Bone Season is set in the UK in this near future, but the history has been rewritten. There are these forces at play within the government, and people can have magical powers, typically called clairvoyance. And if you are clairvoyant, then that is criminalised, and if you're found out, you're put to death. And our main character Paige ends up getting found out at the beginning of the first book and getting sent to Oxford, where everything gets broader and the worldview expands. Would definitely recommend her as well. So those are some of my favourite British authors and some recommendations of their books. Let me know if you have read any of these and your thoughts on any of them, and if you've enjoyed these authors, and your recommendations of any other British authors that I have not highlighted today. I'm sure there are a good few out there. What I have realised as well whilst I was making this list is that I could find plenty of, British fantasy authors, and there's plenty of British authors in other genres as well. But I could not find very many romantasy British authors. That the fantasy romance genre seems to be full of non-British people. I don't want to just say Americans, because I think, but it does seem quite Americanized. Potentially there are some out there that I just have not realised are British. I did see that Imani Eru, who has written the Heavenly Bodies series, is British, and I was like, maybe there is a British fantasy romance author. But that whole subgenre looks to be quite heavily American right now. And maybe that will change as, things shift and grow, and that subgenre has definitely got a lot more popular in the past few years and has really developed. So potentially it will come with time that more British authors will go into that space. But it did make me realise how centred that genre is around a certain group of people. Let me know your recommendations of any British authors, if you've read any of these, and if you plan to read any of them anytime soon. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!